So good morning again, everyone. I hope that you're all doing well. And today we will start with looking at in more details the different commodities of energy. So we will look at the highlights and concepts for coal, oil, natural gas, renewables, and electricity statistics. And today I am together with Taylor Morrison, who is a statistician at the IEA, and this year she has been looking at the Ghana statistics and building the energy balance. So if you have any questions on specifically on Ghana energy data that the IEA is producing, do not hesitate to write down your questions in the Q&A box, and Taylor will be happy to get back to you. So the agenda here is that today we are doing the statistics second webinar on the commodity, statistics by commodity. Tomorrow we will look at the energy balances and CO2 emissions. And then on Friday, we will look at prices and taxes and energy efficiency indicators. Then next week, you will look at the modeling, where you will have 4 modeling sessions with IEA experts, and then you will have 2 modeling sessions the week after, the third week, by our partners from Imperial College and Polyme, and then in the 4th week there will be a session on SDG 7.1 and the wrap-up and quiz. Before we start with the presentation, let's quickly look at some of the housekeeping rules. So the presentation, the session today, it's all virtual. And if you have any questions, please use the Q&A box to write to us your questions. If you have urgent clarification during the presentation, you can also use the raise your hand button to let us know that you want to ask us a question. If you have any other questions, you can also write to us, to me, Zakia, Arnaud, and also to the Africa program, and we will be happy to answer any question you might have. So if we look at the energy sources, we see that it's different in each region. And if we look at the OECD region, we see that around 80% of the energy supply mix is made of fossil fuel. So you have coal, oil, and natural gas. And only 20% it's made of biofuels and waste, hydro, nuclear, solar, etc. But if we move to Africa, we see that the split is quite different, and only 50% of the mix is made of fossil fuel, and the rest is made mostly of biofuels and waste, and very little of hydro, nuclear, solar, etc. Then if we move even further and we look at sub-Saharan Africa, where here we are excluding South Africa, we see that the share of biofuels and waste, it increased even more, and it's around 70%. And if we look at Ghana energy mix, we see that the mix, it's quite similar for biofuels and waste to Africa, where it accounts for only 42% of the mix, and oil as well plays a quite big role. Let's now quickly see again how data are collected and where they come from. So what are our sources? So for supply and transformation data, the main sources are for energy industries, producers, importers, and exporters. It's surveys and administrative data. For demand data, so for energy consumption, we usually use end-use surveys for household and enterprises. There's also an integrated approach where we can use existing surveys to add more questions on energy data. You can use direct measurement for electricity, and also make use of estimations and modeling to, for example, to fill out gaps in surveys. before we look at the presentation, let us do again some Menti interactive questions. So can you please connect yourself to www.menti.com? I will connect myself as well. Here. So please connect to www.menti.com. You can use your phone or you can use your computer to connect yourself and use the code that appears on the screen, which is 78, 25, 48, and 39. The code is 78, 25, 48, and 39. Once you have put the code, you will see the first question. And the question is, how imports of combustible fuels are taken into account in energy statistics? So there's three possible answers here. So is it every time that a product enters a country, even if it's just only in transit? Is it when you account only by the country of final destination? Or the import statistics are based on future contracts of energy commodities? So how do we report imports of combustible fuels in energy statistics? Do you include also transit? Do you include only by country of final destination? So we already have a few answers coming in. I give you a few more seconds. So we have more participants that think that it's only by country of final destination. So we have 10 participants that have replied, and 7 out of 10 think that it's by the country of final destination. And the correct answer is indeed, imports are taken only into account by the country of final destination. And here transit is not taken into account. But you will see more the subtleties of this during the presentation. The next question is, what can we consider as refinery inputs? So is it only crude oil? Is it only crude oil and natural gas liquids, which are NGLs? Is it crude oil, NGLs, but also other products of fossil and bio origins? So what can you put in a refinery? You have 3 choices here. So what can we put in a refinery? Wait a few more seconds to allow for people to answer. And here the correct answer is indeed, in a refinery, you can put as input crude oil, natural gas, liquids, and also other products of fossil and bio origins. Next question. So what are NGLs? What are natural gas liquids? Is it the same as liquefied natural gas? Is NGL the same as LNG, but in a different form? Is it a waste product extracted during natural gas purification and of no value? Is it a mix of gases different from natural gas and more similar to oil products? Or is it something else? So we have more people that think that it's a mix of gases, different than natural gas and similar to oil products. I'm sorry. Again, I'll give you some more time to think about it. And let's see the correct answer. Indeed, natural gas liquids, it's a mix of gases. It's different from natural gas and more similar to oil products. And in the IEA questionnaire, in the fuel questionnaires, it's also reported in the oil questionnaire. So next question. So here, what is the renewable energy source that witnessed the highest growth since 1990? Is it wind, solar photovoltaic, liquid biofuels, biogases, or geothermal? So since 1990, which renewable energy source witnessed the highest growth? So here it's quite, most of you, all of you think that it's solar PV. There's one participant that think that it's liquid biofuels, two that think that it is wind. And the correct answer here, it's indeed solar PV that has witnessed the highest growth since 1990. Next question. From an energy statistics point of view, what are the other uses of wood besides charcoal production? So what can we, from an energy statistics point of view, what can be the use of wood? As a raw material for the production of furniture, as a combustible for cooking and space heating, or none of these? So what would you report in energy statistics as a use of wood besides charcoal production? Think about an energy use. And here, most of you got it right. So from an energy statistics point of view, we report only as combustible for cooking and space heating. And for raw material, for the production of furniture, no, this does not, it's not in the scope of energy statistics. Next question. Which sector consumes the most electricity globally? So globally, is it the residential sector? Is it the industry sector? Is it the services commercial sector? Or is it the transport sector? So globally, which of these sectors consume the most energy? Electricity, sorry. So here again, most of you got it right. And the correct answer is indeed industry is first at the global level. But now let's look at sub-Saharan Africa. In sub-Saharan Africa, which sector consumes the most electricity? Is it residential, industry, services, or transport? Before it was the same question for the world, and now let's look at sub-Saharan Africa. So here again, most of you got it right. In sub-Saharan Africa, it's the residential sector that consumes the most electricity. So that was the last Menti question. And now let's move to the presentation.
This presentation will be in 5 parts for each of the main classification of our energy commodities. And for each of those parts, we will see first the key trends, then the key concepts, and finally some key points for data reporting. And this will be done for primary and secondary oil products, natural gas, coal and coal products. Also for this part, we will go quickly since coal is not an energy commodity used a lot on the African continent. And then we'll discuss renewables and electricity. So let's start by discussing some primary and secondary oil products energy statistics. So first of all, let's have a look at the crude oil production by countries. And this production is dominated by 10 major producers who represent more than 70% of the global demand. And among those 10, we have 3 key actors that represent a third of this demand. So an energy landscape in that situation that is far from equally reparted around the globe. Here we are talking about crude oil, but this is not the only part of these categories. We also discuss about refined oil products, secondary oil products. So if we have a look now at the world refinery intakes, we can see that although OECD OECD refinery intakes, stayed more or less stable in times, we have an important growth of refinery activities in several non-OECD regions, such as China, Asia, Middle East. This growth shows a growth in the oil demand in those countries, of the needs for the population of specific oil products. And as we can see on the right, China and all of the other non-OECD regions grew in terms of oil demand in those countries. It is not that visible on this graph on the right, but Africa also knew in the last decade an important growth in its oil demand. So let's have a closer look. In these graphs, you can see pretty clearly that transport has been the sector that drove the most oil demand in Africa for the last 30 years. Road transportations has grew a lot in those last decades, and hence the demand for oil products. But it's not only that. We have also growth in aviation fuel due to increased air traffic, and also some marine fuel demand that grew due to the increased activity in several ports and port terminals in Africa. Do not forget that transport might be the biggest one, but we have all of those sectors that grew also in terms of demand, such as industries in a lesser way, residential, and non-energy use, which is still in a minor in Africa, while it represented a high share of demand now in OECD countries. So now that we discussed some key trends, let's have a look at how we classify our products, those products in our methodology. So we try to distinguish between the products that feed the refinery and the product that comes out of the refinery. So primary oil products, which are coming from natural resources, and finished secondary oil products, which are manufactured in the refinery. This is a rough definitions, of course, because we have some of the output of the refinery that will be used later on as input of refinery. So this will get a little bit more complex later on. Just remember that those products can be classified in many ways. Also for the finished secondary oil products, due to the fact that they are sold products, the name most of the time comes with a specific set of physical properties. Please, if you have doubts on how to report a specific product, do not hesitate to refer to the IRES, so the International Recommendation for Energy Statistics from the United Nations. This is the methodology that we are following at the IEA, and that is followed by most of the international organizations. So to discuss a little bit more in detail, in primary oil products, you will find crude oil and natural gas liquids, for example, coming from oil wells or natural gas fields. But you can also find some synthetic crude oil, which we'll discuss a little bit later, and some secondary products as inputs to the refinery, additives and feedstocks, for example. On the other end of the refinery, we will see first of all, some gases, some refinery gases that are part of the process, and then all of the products that we can find on the market today, such as naphtha, gasoline, diesel, fuel oil, lubricants, bitumen. And in our statistics, we try to focus on the products the quantity of those products that will be used for energy uses, of course. So now let's have a look at how we could represent the chain of flows for each product. So let's first, the primary oil products. The refinery intake is mostly crude oil, but as I told you before, it can also include some other primary and unfinished secondary oil products. But let's keep it simple for now. We focus on the indigenous production of crude oil and some other sources for natural gas liquids, for examples. One note here, we focus in our methodologies on marketable productions, onshore or offshore, but marketable production coming from within the border of a country. If it's coming from another country, it will be reported as trade, so imports or exports. Then we can have also some stocks, some crude oil that have been kept in waiting for the demand for its demand to be used in the refinery. And then we have other flows of consumptions and supply, such as the direct use of primary products. Crude oil can be sometimes used, for example, to generate electricity. And we have some backflows and finished products that are transferred to be used as input to the refinery. Just a note on the backflows here, it represents the feedbacks from the petrochemical industries. We will not detail more here, but this is a part of the oil statistics that can be kind of complicated if we look in a more closer way. So now on the other end of the refinery, we have our refinery that will provide the gross inland deliveries of secondary oil products. But to sustain its activity, most of the time, the refinery burns some of its own production. So refinery fuels will be consumed within the refinery to sustain its own activity. Then we have the refinery gross output, so the outputs of, let's say, motor gasoline or diesel from the refinery, which will be part of the gross inland delivery, and the primary product receipts. So, for example, as I said before, the crude oil that will be used to be burned in a power plant to generate electricity. We can have then some products, so products transferred to be used as primary oil products in the previous slide, and inter-product transfers. Those transfers will be, for example, some specific refined oil products that will be used as another product with other properties. Then, of course, we can have some trades of those products, so import and export from outside of the countries, and international bunkers. So here we report all of the fuel consumptions for airplanes or maritime ways that concerns trips that originated or are going outside of the countries, that are not staying from within the country. And again, we can have here also some stocks of those products for safety reasons, for commercial reasons, for many possible reasons. The gross inland deliveries will be provided for energy sector use, for transformations, and for final and non-energy consumptions. Now, let's have a look at a complete oil data sets to highlight some important trades for Sub-Saharan Africa. So, in Sub-Saharan Africa, in general, we can find countries that produce a lot of primary oil products, so crude oil, NGL, etc. So, the production that is there. But since the capacities, the activities of refinery is very low in Sub-Saharan Africa, we have very few importations of those primary oil and a vast majority that is exported toward other countries that will who will do the activity of refined those primary products. So this high level of export that I told you shows the lack of capacities in refining. And then if we have a look at the oil products, we can see that the countries are mostly dependent on the importations of the secondary oil products to provide the demand of the population for mostly transportation here. As I told you, the refining capacity do not cover the regional demands, hence the reliance on imports that we can immediately see with our statistics. So if we have a look on how we can try to check our data and make sure our data makes sense, one of the main things that we are paying attention to is the transformation efficiencies. When you take any transformations, here we'll be focusing on refinery, we check the outputs and the intakes of the refinery. Those are the two main elements that we have in terms of data. So we take these intakes and these outputs, and we try to see if the losses that occurred during the transformations made sense or not, if the value of the losses that we see. Attention here, we speak about refinery losses when the intake is superior to the output, and refinery gains when the intake is inferior to the output. And we calculate the yield of this refinery by doing some simple calculation. We divide the output of total secondary products by the intake of total primary products, and we put it in as a percentage. So we say that there are losses in the refinery if the yield is below 100% and gains if it's above 100%. Of course, here, if you do this calculation, you need to have everything at the same units, and units matters in this case. Because in mass units, you would expect some small losses and no gains at all. You do not create mass during such transformations. In energy units, it's the same. Due to evaporations, you would lose in total a little bit of the carbon content, so of the energy contained in those products. But in volumes units, if you calculate, for example, in liters or cubic meters, you would expect some slight gains because the products, the secondary oil products that you are creating in your refinery are lighter and occupy more volumes at the end of the refinery process. Now, if we discuss about the final consumption of those oil products, as I told you, those products have specific properties, specific physical and chemical properties, and for this reason, we expect them to have a specific use, a specific final consumption sectors in which we expect them to be. Of course, there can be exceptions in some countries, in some cases, but those, in that case, needs to be documented and explained in your statistics. So here are some examples. Crude oil, as I told you, can be used in electricity plants, but you have also fuel oil and diesel that are most of the time used for this. In aviation, you would expect jet kerosene or aviation gasoline. Transportation, of course, we would expect gasoline, diesel, LPG, and etc. You can see here some main uses, maybe one point on non-energy uses. This part we still record it for accountability, And bitumen is mostly used, for example, in the creations of roads. This is the last part. This is the end for our discussion on oil products. Now let's talk about natural gas, and let's start with some key trends on these products. So, natural gas is the fossil fuels that grew the most in the last decades. Its largest producers are now USA and Russia. And its demand grew almost tripled since 1973, and it's mostly due for its large demand in heat and power productions. Its trade is both in gaseous form through pipelines and in LNG forms, so liquefied forms through tankers, which explain partly its big increase in demand in the latest years because of its ease now to transport this commodity around the world. But it's not the only reason. The main reason is that natural gas is the fossil fuels that emit the less CO2 per unit burned. It's around 60% of coal, for example, which explains its interest for many countries to use this fossil fuel to reduce their carbon footprint while doing their green energy transitions. And as I told you, the dominance of pipeline trade has been decreasing since the emergence of liquefying technologies, which help bring this fossil fuel into other countries. Now, let's have a look at Africa situations. So, global demand for gas doubled since 1990, but in the case of Africa, it almost quadrupled in the same period. It still represents only 4% of the global demand, but still the growth is very impressive when we see it. This growth, as for any countries, is mostly grew by electricity demand. We'll see it right now. So this is a chart that presents the demand driving sectors for natural gas in various regions. So OECD, non-OECD, we can see that in any case, power and heat generations are on top of the driving sectors, but there are already a distinction between OECD and non-OECD regarding the demand in residential sectors, as many office and buildings in OECD are now hit by natural gas when it's less common in non-OECD countries. If we have a look at Africa and more specifically sub-Saharan Africa, we can see that this trend is becoming more and more visible, with Africa as the global consuming 60% of its natural gas for power and heat generation, and even more for sub-Saharan Africa. So our methodology to collect the data with the IEA, in our methodology, tries to cover all stages of its supply side. So firstly, we focus on the production of natural gas. Again, we talked about this in a few slides, but we focus on the domestic and marketable production here and receipt from other sources. This can be gases from an oil field or some gases coming from a coal mine, for example. Natural gas is mainly produced by extracting a mixture of methane from the underground deposits and also a small share of gas blended into the natural gas grid that come from oil, coal, or renewables. We also cover in our methodology the infrastructure that connect productions with consumptions. So this includes the transmission pipeline systems, the distribution systems, and some LNG, the LNG terminals in the country. Finally, at the end of the chain, natural gas is consumed in different sectors, such as the heat and electricity generation in power plants, or water and space heating for production in the residential and commercial sectors. Another very important part of the supply chain is the trade. Natural gas can be imported and exported through pipeline and liquefied, or liquefied. Now, the arrow that appears represents the interaction of the flow with the infrastructures. All the natural gas produced or imported by pipelines are mixed in the transmission systems, and the imports of LNG are regasified and then mixed. Some big power plants may be located right next to an LNG terminal and sourced directly from the regasification process. From the transmission system, it goes to the distribution network, which has a lower pressure. Most of the small and medium natural gas consumers are connected to this grid, which explains the importance for us to have a clear and precise data collections on the trade of natural gas, to know which part has been imported as LNG or as gas through pipelines. Now, let's discuss again on the production of natural gas. As a reminder, in our methodology, we measure the productions once the products are in marketable state. This is once we have subtracted all the impurities and subtracted the quantities of natural gas flared or re-injected. Re-injected quantities often occur in an oil field with associated natural gas. They are re-injected to favorize more commercializable products and to keep the pressure within the field. Although keeping tracks of the re-injected quantities is not mandatory, we encourage countries to keep track of those values, and especially of the flared gas, which are important for the CO2 accountability of a country. They represent a large part of CO2 emissions in the atmosphere. So we have here an extraction point. It can be an oil field, a gas field, a coal mine, and from it we have the gross productions. This gross productions, part of it will be flared, as I told you, or re-injected, and then the rest goes through the natural gas processing, in which we extract the impurities, so sulfur and other elements, and also natural gas liquids, NGLs, that will be found later in our oil statistics. Please refer to the previous part. And out of this processing, we will have the marketed productions of associated gas, non-associated gas, collier gas, and this is the reported quantity on which we focus later on in our statistics. Again, in any statistics work, the units and physical, and especially here the physical conditions in which the measure is made are important. Natural gas being a gas, the pressure and temperature at which you are doing the measure of volumes will impact the result of your measure, and it's important that those points are made in a clear in your data sets. As I told you before, regarding natural gas reporting, most of the difficulties comes actually from the trade data. Import should cover gas entering your countries for domestic consumption and reported under the country where the gas was produced. So import, for example, from Nigeria will be classified in such way. Export should be domestically produced, so before N, the unused quantity leaving the country should be reported under exports. To say it in another way, we focus on the ultimate origin or destinations of the gas, and we do not include in our data statistics the transit and re-export of natural gas. Now, if we talk a little bit about transformations, natural gas can be used in several ways to be transformed into another energy form. So the most obvious is the electricity and or heat plants, so to produce electricity and heat. But it can also be used in some coal processes in mixed with other elements in coke ovens, blast furnaces, or gasworks plants to generate several gases that will be burned to sustain the activities of those industrial activities. And finally, it can be used in a gas to liquid plants to generate some synthetic oil products. We will not go too much in depth here, but keep in mind that this exists and could be reported in some of the data you encounter. So now we are done with natural gas and we will move on toward coal statistics. Now we will talk briefly about coal and coal products. Regarding coals, the key trends are, of course, located in Asia with China and India. China is the world's largest producer of coal, followed closely by India. And those two countries use a large part of coal because of its abundance, cheap cost, and low technology barriers that allow a quick generation of electricity and support for industrial activities, such as iron and steel productions and cement manufacturers, for example. Coal has some environmental concern linked to those activities because it is the largest CO2 emissions per unit of energy burned among conventional fuel. But it's not that of fuel from the past because it has some development possibilities such as carbon captures and storage, and could still have some years in the future of being consumed. Now, if we have a look at the classification in our methodology, there are several ways, because of historical and scientific reasons, of classifying coal. In our methodology, we try to do it by quality of the coal. So you would have here hard coal or brown coal, describing their physical aspect. And from that, we will have distinction between coking coal and flaccite, over bituminous coal and subbituminous coal, and lignite. The distinction being made with their calorific value, the amount of energy that they contained, and the amount of carbon within their physical constituents. Another way to distinguish is to see through their usage. For example, coking coal is sometimes referred as metallurgical coal because it's used mostly in iron and steel industries, and anthracite and bituminous coal will be used mostly in electricity and heat generations or residential smaller activities, and will be referred as steam coal because of its use in generators. Lignite, it's still usually excluded from this kind of classifications. One important element here to keep in mind when you talk about the coal statistics are that calorific value may vary depending on the flows you are checking in your statistics. For example, the calorific value in your productions might not be the same as the one used in your consumption in electricity and heat generations, because of selection of specific coal quality for specific consumption and the mix with the trade of those products. So if we check now those five types of coal that we discussed in the previous slide are what we call also primary coal. So fossil fuel extracted from a mine and made of carbonized vegetal matters under the form of a rock. But it is not the only part, the only product that we cover in coal. We have also derived fuel, such as we had secondary oil products, and we can have some derived solid products from activities such as coal tar, coke coke, or patent fuels, and also some manufactured gases that are the outputs, some of the outputs of activities in metallurgical, in the metallurgical sectors, for example. As I told you before, the weighted average for calorific values are important to be made when you are working on coal, because of the real variation you can encounter depending on the source of the coal you are checking right now. So here is a little example of a calculations in a country that use a mix of calorific value of coal coming from 3 other countries. And if we do the calculation of the weighted average, so as a reminder, you multiply the calorific value by the quantity, the respective quantity consumed, and you sum those elements and divide them by the total quantity consumed, you obtain the average net calorific value that you will be used for your total coal consumptions reported in your energy statistics. This can apply, of course, to any other energy commodity that you will be using in your datasets. One last part on calorific value. As I told you, we expect it to vary depending on the flows of consumptions, but of course, it is not the only way. It is not. We do not expect it to vary in a crazy, very large way. We expect for each product the calorific value to be within specific range of value. So, for example, cooking coal, we expect it between 25,000 and 33,000 kilojoules per kilograms. And also, depending on which products, we would expect the variation between the NCV and the GCV to be around 5 or 10%. So this slide is available right now, so please don't hesitate to refer to it if you have doubts on the value you obtained for specific product that you would encounter. The coal balance, when we present it, is actually the easiest to represent in terms of difference between the supply and the demand. So supply, we have the domestic production from various sources, trade and stocks variations, and all those elements represent the supply of coal. And on the demand, you will have the transformations, we see that just after, the energy industry on use, and the total final consumptions. Do not forget that due to the way coal is transported, most of the time by trucks, there can be losses that are important. So do not forget to keep track of those distribution losses to keep your statistics in a good way. Coal balance, so we talk, as I told you, we talk now about, and finally about transformations. It's actually the same almost setup as for natural gas. So you would have coal consumed in electricity and heat plants to generate those two energy commodities. And then you will have the consumption of coal within various industries such as coke ovens to create coke oven coke. Those products being used in blast furnace for metallurgical activities. And finally, you can have some coal used in gas works to generate gas workers and gas coke. One last part, again, this is in Africa only used in South Africa, but good to remember about it. You can use coke oven coke in liquefaction plants to generate some synthetic oil products. So not used in many countries, but still good to keep that in mind. If you see the term of synthetic crude oil, it can be coming from coal products. This is all that we will cover in coal for Africa. And now we turn to renewables statistics.
So maybe now we can We can make a pause here and take some questions and answers if you have any. I am joined by my colleague Nicolas Cohen, who is an expert on energy statistics and has been processing also many African countries, so has a good experience on African data. So please, if you have any questions, you can raise your hand or you can just write it down in the question and answer box, and Taylor and Nicola will be happy to reply to you. For the moment, there's no questions. Please don't be shy to ask questions if you have any, especially on what we have just looked at now, oil, gas, and coal, how the statistics are built up, what we take into account, what we exclude. No questions. Oh, there's one maybe. So there's a question, Nicola, on, I would like, from Laura Zodi, I would like to know why re-export is not included in the statistics.
Thank you very much, Laura. So yes, indeed, with the exception of electricity, for which we do cover the re-exportation due to technical difficulties, we do not include any re-exportation in our data statistics. The reason being mostly to ease the data, the data and the comprehension of the data in a country, first of all, because if you reduce and only focus on the on the part consumed or demanded in the country for importation and the part that is domestically produced for the exportations, you will have an easier way to see your data. And also it is the validations and the following of the energy contents of those fossil fuels. And so we got two other questions in the meantime. The explanation for the international bunker. Okay, so quickly on international bunker, the idea there is due to world calculations of CO2 emissions, we did not, there was a part of the CO2 emission from fuel combustions that was due to the international commerce. So the big tankers moving around on the oceans, or the plane moving our people and also commodities. Those consumptions were difficult to attribute in a fair way to one or the other country. Let's say planes that are going from New York, stopping in Paris for freight, and then finishing their travel in Beijing, to whom the consumption should be allocated. It's not an easy question. So the solution that was found was to create some artificial countries that we call the international bunkers. And those bunkers are the ones receiving the consumptions of aviation fuel and navigation fuel for those exchanges. So in the practical way, how do we report that? It is that every plane or boat, vessel, whatever, that is leaving your country for an international voyage, so meaning that it's going outside of your borders, would be reported if the consumption of fuel in those apparels would be reported into the international bunkers. In the other way, if you have some domestic flight, let's say helicopters travels within the country, or a fishing boat in the sea, those would go to the domestic navigations or aviations. So the real differences here is to find the origins and destinations of the apparel. So for that, you can see with use your custom custom office, the one who manages the borders. They might have some information, and also the authorities of the port or the airport. They should have the info on the specific origin and destination of those apparels. And one last question from Sheila. So in the key gas trends, demand driving sector, the slide showed a sector named energy sector. Can you please clarify what that is? Yes. So when we say energy sectors, it's mostly electricity generations in the case of natural gas. So this will be the consumption of the electric plants generating power or heat in many different countries. So that's why, generally speaking, that's what we include when we say energy sector in that situation. And one last question, maybe then we can move on, Zakia. So is there a transport company that does cross-border transport service? Yeah. So if it is land transportation, so let's say basically truck or buses services, in that case, it's a little bit different because we report that as road consumption. So in that case, we do not differentiate the international voyage or the domestic voyage. Just for everyone, everyone is reporting the consumptions of their transportation companies if they are within the border of the country.
Thanks, Nicolas. So if you have any more questions, you can already put them in the Q&A box while we do the rest of the session. And at the end of the presentation, we will have another question and answer session with Nicolas. So let's continue.
So now we will talk about renewables in our energy statistics. So when we talk about renewables, for example, here in the total energy supply, we can see that it represents global a little bit less than 40% of the total energy supply in the world. When we say renewables, this includes hydroelectricity and solar, wind, geothermal energy, and also biofuel and waste, which represent a large part of those renewables present within the total energy supply. If we look in more detail, we can see that almost 2/3 of renewables in our statistics are made of those biofuel and waste, and more specifically of solid biofuel and charcoal. Hydro represents the first element of electricity generations from renewable sources in our statistics. And it is present in a large part in the world electricity productions, which represent almost 15% of the electricity generated in the world. Renewable sources are the energy communities that have the largest and most important growth rates in the world. Between 1990 and 2018, solar PV gained 36.5% of in productions, followed by wind, biogas, solar thermal, and liquid biofuels, which led to the total renewables to grow of 2%, which is more than the global total energy supply growth in the same period. Now we focus a little bit more on the biofuels part, which are, as we said before, important in Africa. So here is a reminder of the previous slide we showed before. So in sub-Saharan Africa, around 75% of total energy consumption is made of biofuel and mostly traditional biomass. This has implications on health, on social life, and also on the environment of those countries because of deforestation and maintenance of the area for the populations. And if we have a look, we can see that this on those primary biofuels, a large part, 93%, is made of primary solid biofuel, and a lesser part, around 7%, of charcoal. Now it's time for us to dive a little bit deeper on how we classify renewables, because for now we have talked about a lot of different products. Renewables and waste can be classified into 4 different groups. The first one will be the renewable electricity, renewable energy, which have primary energy form of only electricity. This includes, of course, hydro, wind, tide, wave, and ocean electricity generation, and solar photovoltaic or solar PV. So in here, the first point of measurement for the statistics is the electricity produced from those plants and structures. The second part would be the renewable energy, which can produce both heat and electricity, which have a primary energy form of heat. This is composed of geothermal and solar thermal. And in that case, the first point of measurement would be the heat created by the geothermal plant or the solar thermal panel. And then from this, we will see the electricity generated. The third part will be the combustible fuels, which can be stocked or traded. So those are industrial waste, municipal waste, solid biofuel, biogases, and liquid biofuels. So they are treated such as, in the case of fossil fuel, let's say coal, for example, or oil products. So their quantities, their mass being used as a unit of measurement. And lastly, there is a non-combustible heat-only group, which contains only heat pumps. This will not be covered in too much deeply in here because it's not that present on the African continent. So now let's see about solid biofuels to dive a little bit deeper on those important elements in Africa. We focus, as a reminder, for solid biofuel only on the fuel produced for energy purpose. So it is a small part of the total, for example, wood that will be cut in a year. We also do the distinctions between primary and secondary fuel following what is recommended in the IRS. So primary production is the capture or extraction of the fuel of an energy form from natural energy flows from the biospheres, and those only include the commerciable, marketable productions. The secondary production is the manufacture of energy production through the process of transformations of other fuel or energy, whether primary or secondary. So now that this distinction is made, let's see example of solid biofuel that we can encounter. So you would have bagasse, which are a byproduct of the sugar industry, and same for other agronomic industries. You could have rice husk, olive cake, industrial wastes in a renewable form, for example, the natural rubbers. You have then wood pellets and animal waste, black liquor that is a byproducts of paper industries, and of course, wood and woody materials, so firewood, wood chips, sawdust, etc. And finally, one element in which we will dive a little bit deeper, charcoal, which is a product produced from wood products at the origin. So if we follow the biofuel transformation for charcoal productions, unlike the other transformation of combustible fuels, the transformation of wood to charcoal is covered by many international organizations to really dive and try to know more about it. The production of charcoal is an output of a transformation process where wood is considered the input. The losses from this are included in the transformation sectors and are checked by calculating the efficiency of the process. Hence, the importance to have some net calorific value for wood and for the charcoal produced so that we can have a clear view on the efficiency of these transformations. So, as before, we can see that wood is an input into the charcoal kiln. So here you have 2 examples of kiln that can be found in the world. And the output is the charcoal. So important facts about the charcoal production. The efficiency, of course, is the input divided by the output divided by the input. In energy units, we focus here on the energy content. So the reference NCV of charcoal that we use in our statistics is 30,800 kilojoule per kilograms. And the charcoal kiln efficiency that we usually expect is between 10 to 40%. Actually, in reality, we see efficiencies in our data set that goes from 20 to 70%. And this is an ongoing work to try to improve the data collection on those transformations so that we can have more sensible data in the end. Now we will see about the electricity statistics. So first of all, let's see some electricity trends. And what can be said that electricity demand and of course then production has grown a lot in the last 20 years, mostly due to the increased level of incomes from various regions such as Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. So the global production in 2018 was more than 26,000 terawatt hours, which is equivalent of 4.5 million wind turbines in the world. And Sub-Saharan Africa witnessed a threefold increase faster than the rest of the African continent. So we can see that electricity can be generated from various other sources, such as solar, hydro, nuclear, or fossil fuel, gas, oil, and coal. If we look at the share of each of those sources for electricity generation, we can see that depending on the region you are looking at, the origin of electricity will be really different. For example, in the case of OECD, it's more or less spread between coal, gas, and nuclear. And in Sub-Saharan Africa, for example, we see that hydro represents a large majority of the generations, followed closely by gas. Electricity generation mix is highly dependent on the most available and cheapest sources, as well as political choices and incentives in a determined country or regions. So if we look, for example, at the difference between the share of solar generations in OECD or in Sub-Saharan Africa, we can see here difference in terms of access to the technologies and political decisions made in various countries. Now, here are examples of those electricity mix in different countries in Sub-Saharan Africa. And obviously, it's really dependent on the political choices of one country and the availability within the border of the country. So now let's have a closer look at the electricity consumption by sectors to see where it is mostly consumed. In non-OECD countries in general, it's mostly consumed in industries. This is mostly due to the preeminence of China and India data within those countries. But in Africa and sub-Saharan Africa, we see that this share is mostly, this first place is mostly occupied by residential and, in a lesser way, by industries in terms of consumptions. So now let's have a look at residential electricity demand, since it was that important in the previous slide. So the increase in wealth drives higher consumption per capita, and then allows more people to have access to electricity in those countries. And this is a feedback loop. The more access led to an increase in wealth, etc., etc. So we can see in several countries between 2010 and 2019, for example, here we can see Ethiopia, but with the access growing for the population, we have an increase of the GDP within the country. So both elements are connected in our data sets. Now let's talk a little bit more about the data themselves. So how do we represent a tricky issue that are electricity and heat data sets? In terms of supply, we collect the fuel inputs to electricity and heat generations, so the quantity of coal or natural gas burnt to generate electricity. From this, we obtain the gross productions, and we subtract to that the own use by the electricity plant to obtain the net production. In addition to those various elements, one can extract from the production the pumped storage hydro. In some specific hydro plants, the water are pumped back to play the role of stocks of possible energy sources, and some more detailed elements that are not that present on the African continent, which are electric boilers and heat pumps. Then we have the trade, so import and export of electricity. They are specific in the case of specific rules in case of electricity. We will see them a little bit later. And also an important part, which are the losses in transmission and distributions of this electricity. This precise element can be high in case of old or badly maintained transmission and distribution systems, but also due to theft of electricity. At the end of the chain, for the demand, we would have the final consumption of electricity for residential, industries, etc. In addition to all those elements that will be in either physical units for the fuel inputs or in gigawatt hours, one can collect also the peak load and the capacity of this electric system, which are very good indicators to be used later on the development of the country. So firstly, let's look at sources of electricity to see how we distinguish the possible sources. Electricity is produced as both primary and secondary energy commodity. Primary electricity is obtained from natural sources such as hydro, solar photovoltaic, wind, tidal, or wave energy, for example. Secondary sources are obtained from the heat generated by burning a combustible fuel. So either fossil fuel, coal or gas, or etc., or also from nuclear fissions, from geothermal energy, and from solar thermal heat. So this is the first distinction that you can find in the dataset when we talk about primary electricity and secondary electricity. Now, also, some distinctions we can do in the electricity data are the type of producers. You can have main activity producers, which for whom the generations and of electricity or heat and the sale of this production to third party is their primary activity. So most of the time, those are plants like nuclear plants, thermal plants, natural gas, electricity plants, but for which the sole objective is to sell this electric or heat generated. And then we have the auto producers. Auto producers generate electricity and heat as a second or byproduct of their own activities. Let's say, for example, a windmill that will generate a little bit of electricity from its activity. It can sell this electricity to the grid without this being its main source of incomes. Now, another distinction in a type of plant would be the type of energy that is produced at the end of it. So you have electricity only, heat only, or combined heat and electricity, which is also referred as CHP, combined heat and power. Now that we have seen the distinctions we can do in the data, let's talk again about efficiencies. So if we insist on this in this presentation, it's because efficiencies are important to keep good track of your data sets and check the quality of your data set. And again, an efficiency is calculated by the output divided by the input in net using net calorific value for to work on energy units. And in energy units, it's always below 100%. The efficiency will differ by fuel or technologies. And once again, you must calculate your efficiency in energy unit every time you can. So, for example, an input of 100 units into a power plant would have an output of 20 units plus 45 units of 20 units of electricity plus 45 units of heat. And if you calculate the efficiency, considering it's all in the same unit, you have a 65% efficiency. The rest, the 45 units lost, are what we call the heat lost, and are part of any transformations from one form of energy to another. So, just a reminder, use the same energy units everywhere, hence the importance in energy balance, as you've seen in other presentations, of picking the correct energy unit. Now, let's go back a little bit when we were discussing about capacities. In addition to production, consumption, and trade data, we try also to capture in our data the power plant capacities, specifically the net maximum capacity. Net maximum capacity is simply the maximum power output that a power plant can produce with all plants running at full blast, and we consider for methodological reasons that we capture this on the 31st December of the reporting year. These are useful data for analysts to have. However, they can also be useful for statisticians when checking the data, as we can compare actual reported production value with the maximum potential production values to check if the data made sense. This value, actual production divided by potential production, is called the capacity factors. So, as you can see, capacity factor is actual production divided by capacity times the time of a year, in that case, or in any other time frame you are working here. Again, this value should always be less than 100%, except if there were plants closure near the end of the year, in which case the figure may be distorted. And there are different expected values depending on the technology. For instance, nuclear plants are expensive to build and therefore are typically run as much as possible, whereas solar PV, which does not run at night and is both weather and location dependent, will have lower capacity factors. So, as statisticians, we can use both historical and expected capacity factor as a check in our data. Now, let's talk again on the concept between gross and net productions. Gross production refers to the total output of electricity or heat generated in a facility before any uses. However, not all of this is used for productive purpose beyond the power plants. Some of the electricity and heat generated is used on-site at the power plant for lighting, heating, and to support plant operations. This is referred to as on-use. The remainder that is left after subtracting the on-use is the net production. However, remember that for auto producers, productions only refers to the heat sold, heat or electricity sold to the grid, which bring to this kind of which brings us to a final check that you can do regarding the on-use, but we expect it should not vary too much over time and stay around 5%. So as I told you in the previous slide, you have also a value expected, which is the transmission and distribution losses. So let's see a little bit more what's happening in the various part of those losses. As electricity travels through cables and transformers, energy is lost along the way. Much of this is in the form of heat, as the electric current flowing through the cable raises its temperature. This energy is lost as it dissipates into the surroundings, reducing the amount of energy that reaches the final destinations. In general, losses can be expected to be in the range about 5 to 15%. With losses on the lower end of the scale observed in more advanced, compact, and well-maintained grid, and higher losses observed in older or more distributed grid, and where there is a high rate of meter bypassing. In other words, theft of electricity. Now, let's see to finish on trade for electricity. As I told you, there are specific rules regarding trade of electricity. Unlike other fuels, trade of electricity and heat are more difficult to understand because they are not physical units that you can move by yourself. It's a flow of electrons through a cable. So how do you report this? Well, you report it as a flow, actually, like a flow going through borders of a country. And in that case, we do not focus on the origin and destinations of those electrons. Let's take an example to see it a little bit more clearly. Here we have 3 countries, Togo, Benin, and Nigeria. So let's imagine that Togo is importing electricity from Nigeria through the network of Benin. Those 3 countries would have to report the flows as it follows. Nigeria would report exportations toward Benin. Benin would report some importations from Nigeria and the same value exported towards Togo. And Togo would report the importation from Benin. So here, for electricity, this is the only part where, in our methodology, we report the transit of flows. Now we will briefly discuss on the possible electricity data sources for your data collections. So very briefly, we already discussed about this before. You can use surveys toward power producers, toward enterprise, households, or market or operators to collect from them on a regular basis data on value of production or consumptions. You can use administrative data from energy regulators, customs office for the trades, and data collecting from program policy implementations to check the efficiency of specific policies. You can use direct measurements, so using conventional or smart meters to directly measure on a building or on a specific place the consumption on regular points. And finally, you can use estimation and modeling for example, using the plant capacity informations to estimate generations of specific sources. With this, we reach the end of these presentations. So the IEA have a lot of resources available online. So some free products, such as the Keyword Energy Statistics, Data and Statistics Browser, and Energy Atlas manuals on energy statistics methodologies. And we have also a lot of various energy data on specific flows, on CO2 emissions, and or energy price. Now, this is the end of this presentations.
So now, if you have any questions on the rest of on renewables and electricity, please let us know in the question and answer box. I think there's already one, Nicola, that maybe you could take over.
Yes, indeed. So regarding the electricity consumption by sectors in sub-Saharan Africa, mostly it's growing for every sector if we get the real big picture here, with the exception, as Zatia explained to you, of recent years, last year, where with the crisis we had a reduction of the access to electricity. This overall growth of the electricity access for the populations in the latest year led to an increased demand in terms of electricity from all the population. So residential and commercial and service sectors have been growing a lot. Also, we have the another evolution is that more and more energy-intensive industries are developing in several countries. For example, cement industries has been developing for several industries, and you will see that in the recent years, a big increase of the demand, and some mines also started to request more and more electricity.
Thanks, Nicola. Please, if you have more questions on the presentation, let us know. No questions, then maybe we can move with the exercise session. And still, if you have questions, you can still put them in the Q&A box for us. So now let me share my screen, which is very strange because now two seconds. It's very strange. I can't find the Excel file. Sorry about this. I have an issue sharing the Excel file. It's not finding it. Very strange. Maybe Nicola, if you can open the Excel file for me, that would be great, because my share screen, I don't know what happened. It's not detecting any window to open it.
Just closing a few things and I will share that.
Yeah, thank you. So it's in the Ghana folder. I'm sorry about this. I don't know what Zoom is doing. Strange. In the meantime, if you have any questions, let us know. Did you manage to find the file?
Yes, just
Thank you.
looking to share my screen.
We can't hear you.
You should see it now.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So that was the first exercise on statistics, where we present to you a country A statistics on natural gas. So you have information on million cubic meters for the supply and the demand. And you are asked here to study the efficiency of electricity generation in country A from natural gas as a new plant is being discussed. And you receive this energy statistics sheet from the ministry to help you with the task. And the first question here, it's about, so here, and the second table below in green, it's about gross calorific values. And here you're given the calorific values for production and imports. And then you're asked to calculate the weighted average gross calorific value for 2013 to 2019. So the highlighted yellow cells. So here you can see that in 2013, the production value in million cubic meters, it's quite low. And so the weighted average calorific value would be closer to the import calorific value. And the way you calculate the calorific value here is that you take the quantity in million cubic meters, for example, for production, you multiply it by the gross calorific value of production, you add your imports value, you multiply it by the imports calorific value, and then you divide it by the sum of your production and imports in million cubic meters. And you do the same calculation for all the years. So what you notice here is that, as we said, for production, the value is very low. So it's normal that your weighted calorific value is closer to the imports. But in 2019, for example, both production and imports are more or less half-half. So then your weighted calorific value is like in between the two. So it's 39, which is between 38 and 40. And then the second question was, can you identify something wrong with production gross calorific value? So it's the first question, but part A, part B. Do you see any way of correcting it? So here, when we look at the production gross calorific value, we see that it's 38 from 2013 to 2019. It's the same value for all the years. And this can be a bit suspicious because normally calorific values, they vary over time. And so this is something that you would query with your data providers, and you would like to ask them to provide you first more information on this Maybe here you might develop a new survey to collect a questionnaire to collect that information, and even make use of a mandate to make the producing companies report that information. Sometimes producing companies, they often just report the quantity, but not the underlying, the other information such as calorific values. And so second question, it's using the gross calorific value for natural gas, calculate the natural gas balance in terajoule. So here we will use the amount in cubic meters, and you would multiply it by the gross calorific value. So for production and imports, you have specific gross calorific values. For these two, you would apply the specific value. But for exports and the others, you would apply the weighted average calorific value, given that you don't have the specific information. So here, that was for question 2 about filling the table for terajoules. And the question 3 here is using the calculated balance, calculate a verification indicator for the statistical difference. So here, a way to check your statistical difference is to calculate the statistical difference divided by your supply. And as we said in the presentation, normally this is something that the range would be less than 5%, it's kind of acceptable. But here in 2015, you have an outlier, you have minus 55%, which makes you think that something might be wrong in the data that has been sent to you. And so every time an indicator is higher than 5%, it's suspicious and shows that either the supply, a flow in supply or in the demand has been misreported. And the question, so question 4, we just replied. And then question 5 is using the natural gas and electricity generation data, as well as the conversion factors provided, calculate the electricity generation efficiency. So efficiency, it's calculated as output divided by input. But here, your output is reported in gigawatt hour and your input is reported in terajoule. So here you need to convert your terajoule into gigawatt hour by using the conversion factor here. So 1 gigawatt hour is equal to 3.6 terajoule. So here you take your output for natural gas, you divide it by your input in terajoule, in gigawatt hour, sorry, and you get 30% for 2010, and you use the same formula for the other years. And then, do you notice any issues with the calculated efficiency? So indeed, in 2015, the efficiency is quite low, it's only 20%. And compared to expected efficiency ranges and also the historical values. So here, what could be wrong? So if we look at the output of natural gas in 2015, it looks quite okay. But the input of natural gas, it's very high. It's 8,619, whereas the year before it was around 5,000, and in 2016 it's around 6,000. So in the middle, there's a big outlier here. And then try to correct the wrongly reported figure in the statistics. So here, when we have this kind of problem, we would try to fix the calorific values. So here we know that in 2014 it's 35%, in 2016 it's also 35%. So we can estimate that in 2015 a correct value would be 35%. as well. So here, using this 35% efficiency, we can back calculate the input of natural gas for electricity generation. So if we go up in the cell J34, and here we back calculate, not H34, sorry. Yes, so here, this value which we think is wrong, if we back calculate this one as equal to H56, so if we, so as the output, and we apply a 35 efficiency, so divided by, so if we do H56 divided by bracket 35% divided by the, we convert back to terajoule, so divided by 3.6. So here, normally you see that so here your statistical difference get fixed, it gets within the range, and if you go down here in row 69, you see also that here it's 35 because that's what we applied up, and this fixed the problem. So that was the end of this exercise. I really recommend you to do it if you did not have the time to do it before the session today. And please let me know if you have questions on the exercise. You can send me your working version by email, and we can do correction together and see if you have any issues with answering the questions. And yeah, let us know if you have questions on the exercise, and happy to make the correction of what you did by email if you want. So do you have questions? No questions? So I really recommend you to do in advance the exercise, as usually during the session we go quite fast on the solution, but happy to make the correction for you in private if you send it to me by email, or ask us in the Q&A box if you have any question. And or if you have any other questions on the presentation, on the statistics by commodity, let us know. And tomorrow we will do energy balances. So it's we will show you how do you move from energy statistics to energy balances, and then with the energy balances data, how you can calculate CO2 emissions. And we will also have another exercise on energy balances and CO2 emissions. So if you have time today to work on those as well, that would be great. We have some time left, so maybe Taylor, if you want to say a few words on the Ghana data that you have been working on.
Sure, thanks, Zakia. I've been working on the Ghana data, primarily using data published by the Energy Commission Ghana that has excellent publications on Ghana's energy statistics. So using those sources, as well as some supplemental data from the United Nations Statistical Division were used to complete the energy balances for 2019. So for the total energy supply, primarily about 40% is oil products, and approximately another 40% consists of biofuels and waste. Another approximately 17% is natural gas, and the remainder is from hydro. So the most notable trend that we're seeing in recent years for Ghana is the rapid increase of natural gas production and corresponding use in electricity generation. So this has been really interesting to see how this has changed the energy supply in recent years. In terms of challenges with compiling Ghana's energy statistics, the electricity production data from thermal production is not divided into the various fuels, so natural gas, fuel oil, etc. And this is very common in energy statistics in general, as often thermal plants can run off of multiple fuels, and we only have that output data as opposed to the various input datas. So in terms of estimation, there has been some estimation involved in separating and determining how much electricity is exactly coming from natural gas, how much electricity is coming from fuel oil. But other than that, the energy data has been very, very good, and we have quite a complete balance for Ghana.
Thanks, Taylor. And yes, if any of the participants have information to share with Taylor on improving the energy statistics, if you have any extra data sources that maybe Taylor is not using, so please do not hesitate to write to Taylor or to me, and we'll make sure to include them in our publication. And also, it would be great to exchange with you if you are working on those statistics and improve the Ghana statistics at the IEA. So thank you, Taylor. I don't see any other question and answers, so I will close the session for today now. And thank you everyone for listening to us for the past 2 hours, and see you tomorrow at the same time to work on balances and CO2 emissions. Thanks, Taylor and Nicola, for joining me today. Bye.
Goodbye, everyone.